Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 148 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. So a long time ago, I read a book called The Langoliers by Stephen King. I'm a big Stephen King fan. And one thing Stephen King does in a lot of his writing is he circles back in a story. He'll paint a scene and you'll read it and you'll picture it and you'll experience it. And then sometime later in the book, you come back to it from the perspective of another character. I love when authors do this because you get a really full picture of both sides of an interaction or an experience. And The Langoliers is about a group of people that fall asleep on a plane and wake up and the plane's empty. No one's on it except this small group of people. They're in sort of a parallel universe. And there's all sorts of multiple storylines that feed into it. People that know the people on the plane, all these different things that feed into the storyline. I have not read it for a long time. However, there was a scene in the book about a little boy up early in the morning in the middle of Maine, I think walking his dog. And he's out in a field all by himself. And he just loves the smell of the grass in the morning and the dew and the light of the sun. And he pees. He's peeing outside, right? And it talks about how good it feels to pee and everything else. And I remember just totally getting pulled into the description of that boy in the field and what it felt to be like. There's a plane that flies by, and there's another character, the person that's flying the plane, I think. And ultimately what has to happen is anyone that's in that field and in that area at that time has to die. So the pilot of the plane doesn't realize that this is something that has to happen. The little boy doesn't know that peeing in a field is the last thing he'll do. You have this whole beautiful scenario. But there was a description from the pilot of the plane as he sees, I believe he sees the boy get shot. And he knows now that he's going to die. And he's flying the plane. And he describes in great detail the feeling of relief, knowing that it doesn't matter. There's nothing he can do. He's going to die. And it's this sort of like split second where all the fear goes away. You let it go. It doesn't exist anymore. And he pulls back up on the handles of the airplane. And I remember reading that scene and listening to his thought process, because Stephen King does that as well. He gets you into the head of the character. And it struck with me. And what came to mind for me was like a fast forward movie, flashing all these scenes of times that I felt that way, both really, really good and really, really bad. And what came to mind the most was a roller coaster where you're going up the roller coaster. I love roller coasters, but the slow rise to the top of the first drop is always horrifying. My upper lip sweats. I'm really nervous. I regret getting on the airplane or the roller coaster. Skydiving is the same way, my Freudian slip. You're climbing up knowing that you're going to have to jump out of the plane or that the roller coaster is going to plunge over. And in the split second before it happens, you let it go. There's nothing you can do about it now. There's no getting off. There's no turning back. Here you are. 3, 2, 1, go. And then you plunge out of the plane or the roller coaster goes to the other side and all the fear is gone and complete acceptance of the fact that even though you're still powerless over what's happening to you, you have this sort of feeling of release or power. I measure my years now, May to May. When I was growing up, it was often the same way, May to May or June to June. As a school teacher, the beauty of education is that it starts and finishes and you get a break. So even if you have the same job for 30 years, it's really 30 different jobs because each year is completely different than the year before. Every year has a start and a finish. You don't just meld year into year into year. So oftentimes summer was a time to reassess. What shall I do differently? What are my goals for next year? And you have this sort of downtime to ponder all these things and get ready for your next go at whatever it is. And it's one of the things I miss most when I lost my teaching job. When I got into teaching at VLAX, that's 12 months a year. There is no beginning and end. It all happens, just asynchronously. Here it is now, the end of June.
And it's a time that I tend to reflect back on where am I now compared to where I was last year at the end of June. And this is when I can really get down on myself because all I see is the ways that I'm either no better or the same. So I look at my clutter-filled, chaotic house. It's no better. We've gone through a kitchen remodel. So, I mean, we have these kinds of things that have been done, but my house is a disaster and it's been a disaster. And it's been a disaster since Molly died. So I look at it like, well, here I am still living in my messy house. I look at my physical improvements athletically, like in CrossFit or with running. Now I've had a great year in CrossFit. I did great in some competitions. I took 20 minutes off my half marathon time from last year to this year. I've certainly had improvement, but I'm basically the same as I was. I haven't worked out in 2 weeks now. I have a needle in my foot. My goals are the same. I just tend to look at where I haven't gotten better. Now, I did the RX version of my CrossFit workouts in the open, and I made it into the semifinals. I mean, the quarterfinals. So I really have to stop beating myself up. But this is what I do. I immediately look at how I failed, and I hold myself so accountable for those failures. Last year, I did the Get Better Girl and 75 Hard. And for 90 days, I followed a really, really solidly rigid diet. I didn't drink. I worked out twice a day. I completed this list of requirements every day for 3 months. And the change in my physique and the change in my sleeping habits and how I felt physically was profound. And in many ways, I've maintained a lot of what I started in that challenge. I still take supplements. I still primarily eat single ingredient foods. I'm back to drinking fairly regularly, but the number of times I've actually gotten drunk compared to how it used to be is minimal. So the beat me up side of me looks at, well, I'm really just no different than I was a year ago. And then the part of me that needs to not beat myself up so much says, yes, but Barbara, you have such a better grasp on all of this. A little while back, I think I did an episode on insanity, like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I have this in my athletics. I have this in my dirty house. I have this in my diet and alcohol. I have this in exercise where I keep, okay, this time I'll stick to my plan. This time I'll stick to my plan. And so I've been, okay, starting on this day, I'll do this. And starting on this day, I'll do this. And this is what I do all the time. And I just sort of am to the point now where it's like, fuck it, I give up. And the guy in the airplane came to mind, like hitting your bottom. What's your bottom? Have I hit my bottom? I mean, I think my bottom in life would be Molly's death, but there's a number of other things that are right there with it sometimes. So this got me thinking about AA. And I've been wondering and sort of contemplating, where does my podcast go from here? I'm going to spend the next several episodes going through the 12 steps and traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not going to be a push on AA for alcoholics. AA for me in my late 20s and early 30s was life-changing. I didn't need help at that time avoiding alcohol. I quit all the time. I would go an entire track season without drinking because that was how I drank. Then when the track season was over, I drank like a fish and I did stupid things and I blacked out. So my alcoholism back then was not a daily occurrence. I didn't wake up and count the hours until I could drink. That type of drinking facilitated existence in my life sort of through my relationship with Kenny, who was a daily drinker. And then when, going through the things that I went through. And so I just got to thinking about the fact that in my head right now, I'm holding myself accountable for changes I'm not making. I'm doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And surprise, surprise, it isn't different. I'm holding on to a lot of the same angers and frustrations that I was a year ago. It was a year ago now that a lot of the things happening politically really begin to bother me and make me think. And a year later, I still can lose sleep over them. The blessing in all this is it made me stop thinking about Roy so much in the middle of the night. And when I say thinking about Roy, it's not like some longing that I wish he loved me. It's not that at all. It's more a moral inventory, which is another AA term, of what went into that relationship and how I let myself get led into just oblivion. That used to eat me up a lot as well. And I'll get to that in some of this. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go back to AA. Maybe I need to go to AA. Maybe quitting drinking is the structure I need in the rest of my life. And I'm not quite so sure that's not true. And I think maybe attending AA meetings might be a good thing for me, not just around the alcohol. One of the most significant areas of growth I had when I did AA in my 20s was learning how to not make up stories to protect myself. When you are a little girl being abused by a parent, And I've never been super clear about who my abuser was, but it was my father, not my birth father. When you grow up in a home that's so unpredictable and scary and terrifying and then fine, you learn to say what needs to be said to maintain the status quo. And this is where hypervigilance comes from. So at a very young age, I could scope the situation and provide the answers that would keep things what I hoped would be at bay. Because I took responsibility for my abuse, I always thought it was something I did or said that caused it to happen. One of my most profound memories, and this has come up so much in my preparation for this exercise, around thinking I caused my abuse, was we were on a family vacation once and all the kids were sleeping in the loft, and my brother and his friend left, and Jonathan and Johanna were going to sleep in with my mother. And so I'm like, well, who's going to sleep with me? And, I was going to be alone in the loft. And my dad said, well, I'll sleep up there with you. And I knew it. I was done. And the whole rest of that day, all I did was think about ways I could get out of it. Like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And of course I didn't get out of it. And I did get molested that night. And it was such a parallel to the Stephen King, to the pilot knowing he's going to die and pulling back on the plane and saying, bring it on, bring me death, right? That last split second moment where you just have to give it over. I oftentimes think of powerlessness as when you finally say uncle, when your brother's gonna like hanging a loogie over your head or has your arm twisted up behind your back and you're trying to be tough and not say it and not say it and not say it. And then you finally say, I give, all right, I give, uncle. And those are the moments in my life like that. I know when I first joined AA, my uncle moment was getting removed from Nike Boston. I was devastated. And I just felt like, okay, I have to make changes in my life or I'm not going to get reinstated and nothing is going to be the way I want it to be. And that was my uncle. That was my bottom. I've had several life bottoms since then. Not all of them led me to sobriety. Not all of them were even directly connected to alcohol. So what I loved most about AA is that the 12 steps can apply to healing from any addiction, not just alcohol. And we're coming to find in all the trauma research that a lot of things that are called a mental illness are really just a natural trauma response, that the 12 steps of AA are actually quite effective in dealing with all sorts of things, all sorts of mental and emotional illnesses. So I'm going to talk a little bit about step one today and a little bit about a book that I'm reading and that I'm going to read and sort of use in these episodes. And what I will also do is share stories from my life that illustrate, flesh out my sort of life story thing and sort of illustrate why I am the way I am today. The first step in Alcoholics Anonymous of the 12 steps is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So you can take the word alcohol right out of here and just say we admitted that we were powerless. It could be powerless over our abusive boyfriend. It could be powerless over our anorexia. It could be powerless over dealing with the death of our child. We all have points where we get to the point where we're like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I give up. I quit. I'm done. Those moments are profound. There's a book that I'm reading that's called Breathing Underwater. And it's written by a man named Richard Rohr. And it's spirituality in the 12 steps. And he's a Christian. And he's someone that was raised atheist and became a Christian. And so he connects all of the 12 steps to teachings of Jesus. I'm not going to do that part of it here. My spirituality knows no name. I was raised Christian. I belong to the Baha'i faith now. I love finding the truths in all of the religions. I find it very comforting to see how they're connected and really how they all say the same thing, just in different ways. But Breathing Underwater is a poem written by a woman named Carol Bialock. I'm going to read the poem now because what came to mind for me was the night in the loft when I was 10 and got molested, was being told we were too late to wake up Molly and I crawled across the table screaming. It was standing next to Roy in a courtroom and hear him tell the judge that he and Amy had talked about how scary I was and that she was afraid of me. These massive moments, sitting across from my attorney and saying, okay, I'm not going to fight for my job, I'll just resign. And him being so gleeful that I finally agreed to whatever it was he was a part of, that I knew A, I'd made the wrong decision, and B, my 20-year teaching career was over. It was lying in the bed after Molly had been unplugged, praying that her heart would just keep beating and she'd start to breathe, and she didn't. It was finally realizing I had to stop using the horrible drugs I was using in the aftermath of Molly's death, that she was never coming back, settling the lawsuit. These moments where you suddenly realize all the duct tape and glue, all the staple guns and twine, won't hold together what's falling apart in your life. Those are intense moments, and I think we all have them. So Breathing Underwater is a poem about that. And so here it goes. I built my house by the sea, not on the sands, mind you, not on the shifting sand. And I built it of rock, a strong house by a strong sea. And we got well acquainted, the sea and I, good neighbors. Not that we spoke much. We met in silences, respectful, keeping our distance, but looking our thoughts across the fence of sand. Always the fence of sand our barrier, always the sand between. And then one day, I still don't know how it happened, but the sea came, without warning, without welcome even, not sudden and swift, but a sifting across the sand like wine, less like the flow of water than the flow of blood, slow, but coming, slow, but flowing like an open wound. And I thought of flight, and I thought of drowning, and I thought of death. And while I thought the sea crept higher till it reached my door, I knew then there was neither flight nor death nor drowning, that when the sea comes calling, you stop being good neighbors, well acquainted, friendly from a distance neighbors, and you give your house for a coral castle, and you learn to breathe underwater. So many things come to my mind when I read this poem. The slow creep of the sea reminds me of John Irving in The World According to Garp and The Undertowed, when bad things are coming and you can't see it, but you can feel it. When the air shifts before a massive thunderstorm and it's not storming out yet, but you know that the weather has shifted and that something's on the horizon. And then she gets to the point where she realizes there's nothing she can do. She can either drown, let it overcome her, or she can acknowledge its existence and learn to breathe underwater, live in a new house. So a new house is simply a new way of living in your reality, right? She can no longer live separated from the sea in her home on the rock. She now has to live in a coral castle underwater and learn to breathe there. And so as an asthmatic, claustrophobic person, the thought of breathing underwater terrifies me. But I was struck in so many ways by the poem, what it sort of meant for my journey as a recovering alcoholic for a long time, and as a recovering victim of child abuse and all the other things I'm recovering from. I feel as though my life is a life in recovery, and it's hard sometimes. It gets tedious. So in step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So what I like about this is so many memories I have in AA when I first joined is once you have a year of sobriety, you can become a speaker. When you've earned your 1-year chip, you can now be a speaker at meetings. And driving to meetings in other towns and getting up in front of a group and telling your story is profound. You learn to be really vividly honest about what's gone on with you. It's really, really difficult. But I loved it. And I loved listening to the stories. I loved listening to somebody talk about something they experienced 20 years ago. These old timers in the program who have years and years of sobriety. And I loved just listening to all of it and how profound their stories were and how me as a new sober person could learn from them. There are lots and lots of teachers and spiritual mentors and gurus and coaches that frown upon programs like AA. They sort of say, oh, that they're keeping you stuck in your issue. No, AA is the ultimate service organization. You take your sobriety and you share it with somebody that's struggling. You hold on to what got you there so that you can be relevant to the person who's just showing up. It is the ultimate service organization. And whether or not I ever return to Alcoholics Anonymous for my current issues around drinking, I think diving into the 12 steps is necessary for me. So another thing they do at AA meetings, they read the 12 traditions. And the 12 traditions are much more about AA as it functions itself. And the first tradition in the 12 traditions is unity. So unity simply means that the good of the meeting is more important than the good of the individual alcoholic in the meeting for the purposes of AA. So I show up to AA and I have all my goals. But if reaching my goals causes me to be a disruption in an AA meeting, or I begin to take too much focus from the meeting onto myself, I am no longer helping the program of AA. I've disrupted the symbiosis. I've disrupted the balance. And this can be true anywhere, in any group or organization that you're in. I'm in my spiritual mentoring group, The Nest, right now. And every group will have people that are very, very willing to talk and can sort of overtake a meeting. All of us are reminded in a spiritual, loving way by Karen that we're all here together and that we need to honor one another by making sure we create space for everybody. So unity is interesting to me. So right now, powerlessness and unity. I'm powerlessness over my life, but I'm in a group that practices unity, that my belonging in the group is just as important as me getting better. The other thing that they do in meetings in AA is they read a sort of a preamble, and this isn't the preamble, but it comes from this. So this is a book called The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wrote in the front of it, and I haven't seen it for a long time. I wrote, keep it simple. I have my phone number given to me by Jim L. at my first AA meeting, 9/23/89. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from the beginning of AA, of the How It Works, chapter 5. Because again, I want you, if you're not an alcoholic, don't turn this off and think like, oh, this is boring. Plug in what it is for you. My dysfunctional marriage, my pain in the neck children, the job that I hate. I eat too much. I don't exercise. My house is a mess. I'm OCD about things. Just plug in what yours is and look at it that way. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. That's pretty profound. And that's where the ego comes into play. So we have the ego, self, and love. So ego is all of the falsehoods we feed ourselves. If you are a really religious person, ego can be considered sin and the devil, like the negative side of you. I look at ego is self, the selfish, sort of self-centered part of you that wants you to believe things. You're fat, you're ugly. Go ahead and eat that, those cookies, you deserve them. That's ego talking to you, trying to maintain the disruption, right? Or ego can also be the other way around. You don't need this. You're so much smarter than these people. This is all ego. The love portion is the part that's willing to give it up, to let it go. Okay, bring me the knowledge. Show me what I need to know. So usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born this way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Let me be clear here. I found this very judgy in the beginning, but as a child in an abusive household, honesty was a killer. Honesty, first of all, both my parents told me to lie to each other about various things in their lives. Telling the truth, the one or two times I slipped up and told the truth about something, I got in trouble. I've told this story before. We were having some spaghetti sauce for dinner and my dad took a bite of it and said, oh, that's delicious. And I blurted it out. I'm like 8 years old. Oh, Uncle Tom came and cooked it. And then of course he threw the saucepan across the kitchen and there was a huge fight. And I got yelled at for opening my big mouth and mentioning that Uncle Tom had came and cooked the spaghetti sauce. So I learned very quickly, you don't tell the truth. And I know that's a hard story to hear. I was incapable for a long time of having the guts to always divulge honesty in myself and with others. Their chances are less than average. There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. I look at this as well as any goal you set for yourself. I was at the track yesterday after track camp and I was hanging up lost and found items on the fence. And there was a gentleman there working with a little boy training for soccer. And the little boy clearly did really not want to be there. And he was sort of balking and the coach laid it out for him. If you want to get good, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. You have to assume that all your competition is training harder than you. All things that I've said. It made no effect on this little boy. He really clearly, at that point in time, did not want to be there and could care less about being good at soccer. He just wanted to be good at soccer, right? He was balking at the steps, that you have to take the steps. My podcast here, 1,000 Tiny Steps. The first one doesn't have to be big, but it has to be taken. At some of these, we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. And this is me. I go back to the movie Homeless to Harvard, where the little girl is holding on, trying to keep her family together, even though her dad's mentally ill and her mother's a drug addict and selling herself on the streets, and they're losing their apartment. Like she doesn't want to change anything. No, we have to stay. That's been a huge issue for me sometimes. When I think of the worst times in my childhood, I tried so hard to just keep everything normal, keep everything the same so that maybe bad things would stop happening. And anytime I've been in a long-term relationship that's really tanking, I just try to keep it the same because the thought of it ending is terrifying. And I've made some terrible decisions out of this fear. Remember the deal with alcohol or whatever it is for you. Cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all the power. The one is God. May you find him now. AA in the beginning was very, very much Christian based. It was founded by two Christian men. There are many atheists in AA. There are plenty of people that have no belief in God whatsoever that are in AA, but what's cultivated is a higher power. And I think all of us have a higher power. There's a saying called there are no atheists in foxholes. So a foxhole is a trench dug in a battlefield that you can get down under so you don't get shot, and you can come up and fire from it and then duck back down. And when you're pleading with the universe for your life, you're praying, right? Meditation, asking for help, any sort of subconscious meditation that you do is a form of connecting to something bigger than yourself. So a higher power, it can be called the universe. Depending on your religion, it could be a prophet in your religion. It could be somebody, it can be, for me, I call it God because I believe in God. I don't have a picture of how he, she, or it might look. God isn't physical, but I do know that there's an entity or an energy or something that helps me when I call on it. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. So that's what we did, right? So that's where I'm at right now in many ways. I feel that I remain stuck sometimes, spinning my wheels and not getting things done. So I got to thinking about it, and I read this poem and I read this book, and I've learned a lot about power and what I think about it. So along with the book, which I'm showing if you're watching me, comes a companion journal. And so I'm going to go over some of the questions they asked. I talk a little bit about it in a lot of my reflections and my answers. There's one thing I did like, and I use the word ego to sort of mean the word sin. The one thing I liked in regard to connecting to God. So Christianity, many branches of Christianity focus on the fact that we're born disgusting and sinful, and that if we don't give ourselves over to God the minute we can, then we're going to go to hell or burn in purgatory or whatever, and that we're naturally bad. My religion is the complete opposite of this. Newborn babies are like a mirror with no dust on it. A new baby and a young child is a perfect reflection of the light of God. Life makes the mirror dusty, and life is what brings upon things that cloud us from a clear connection with the universe or God or whatever. So for too long, we have made sin the starting place in the Christian world and spent an awful lot of time trying to convince already shamed people how shameful they indeed are. What a waste of time and God's mercy. The vast majority just tried to run, hide, or deny. Our postmodern Western world, to lessen the irrational suffering, runs to even more addictions and farther from so much to organized religion when, as Pope Francis had said, the church was meant to be a field hospital on the edge of the battleground. If so, the 12 Steps program is the field manual and the triage guidebook for Christian life. So take Christian out and just put peaceful life, right? That when you really read the teachings of Jesus or any prophet, they talk about loving one another and, do unto others as you have them do unto you, and be kind and be a good neighbor. And Jesus was a helper and a shepherd, and he led people and fed them. He didn't bemoan them and belittle them and berate them. Religion does that. If you don't follow this list of rules, then you will burn in hell. I put a meme on my Facebook. In Louisiana right now, it was just passed that the 10 Commandments need to be posted on classroom walls. I personally disagree with this. I think that just alienates anyone that isn't Christian, and we are not a Christian nation, although there are those that would disagree. I think all that stuff should stay out. I voiced that opinion and received a lot of backlash. I put a meme up that said, all right, if we have the 10 Commandments, then we can have, and it was like a list of 15 other religions and all of their precepts and things. And I got blasted for that. I actually got told by somebody that I was going to lose my soul if I believed that this was true, meaning that there were these other religions with other messages, that the only way to salvation is through the church. And this person believes that that's the Catholic Church. It almost doesn't matter what you say, but the point is, I'm at this point in my life where I'm tired of hating myself. I'm tired of blaming myself for things that aren't my fault. I see that these emotions and feelings often get in my way. So I thought, okay, I'll answer these questions. So in that first step, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. So right now, I think I'm powerless over my procrastination. I am powerless over my inability to follow through. I am powerless over my messy house. I am powerless over my inability to create a schedule. I don't know. I'm just powerless over all these things. I'm powerless over the fact that I set goals and stop trying to reach them early on. There's a bunch of questions, which I'm going to read the questions and give you my answer. And it sort of will guide the rest of this episode. So the first question asked me, how do I feel about being powerless? When have I experienced it? How have I been taught to regard power and powerlessness? I don't know that I've ever been taught to regard power or powerlessness. I was raised at a time where little girls were to be quiet. And even after I told about my abuse, I was told to be quiet about it, to not say who did it, to not talk about it. And so that takes away power right there. I look at a lot of the political agendas right now, and both sides of our political parties, Democrats and Republicans, both of them have massive issues that seek to take away the power of women and either redefine them in a way that eliminates them or prevents them from taking care of their own bodies. It's hard to be a woman right now. To me, that's the first thing that came to mind when I think of power and powerlessness. Power to me elicits a feeling of safety and control. Yet at the same time, I see myself cresting the top of a roller coaster, feeling powerless all the way up, slowly, fearfully climbing, then the release of the car and the almighty plunge down the other side. I am king of the world. I think of the Titanic, right? Even though I'm strapped into the roller coaster, I feel utterly free and brave. And here I am on this roller coaster. I feel incredibly powerful at that time. That's what came to mind for me. Powerless to me is the ultimate utterance of uncle, when you realize with a certainty that you are not going to escape whatever comes next. And then I visualized Stephen King, The Langoliers. I visualized my job loss when I really, truly realized I was never going to get my job back. That example with the child abuse where, as the evening went along, I remember that night I put on like 4 pairs of underwear and like 4 pairs of pajamas. And I got inside a sleeping bag and put like 4 blankets over it. And it was summer. I remember I was just drenched in sweat, but I just thought maybe all these layers of blankets and clothes would send a message, which it did not. I think of Roy and realizing if he would sink to the depths he did to try to humiliate me in front of a judge and promote something that wasn't true, then I give up. I'm done. I'm done. And it was a bad moment for me. And then of course, Molly. And so with Molly, again, it was the slow acceptance, right? It's too late. She's dead, but we're going to send her up anyway. It's like, okay, maybe she'll wake up. And we had like 36 hours of hoping. And then it was the news that she wouldn't. And then it was accepting it again. And then it was, the unplugging. And then it was the lawsuit for 2 years and really complete acceptance, complete like, all right, I give uncle. For Molly's death wasn't until we settled the lawsuit, because throughout that whole time, parts of me still believed that she would live. So that's my power and powerlessness. So the next question was, now we talk about silver linings, joy coming from tragedy, sadness promoting happiness. People who have moved from one seeming success to another seldom understand success at all, except a very limited version of their own. People who fail to do something right, by even their own definition of right, are those who often break through to enlightenment and compassion. One of the biggest things I did as a coach of runners is you learn nothing from a race that you win, except how much fun it is to win. You learn everything from the races at which you fail. Those are the ones that keep you up at night. As much as I should relive breaking 5 minutes in the mile, I relive a lot of other races before that one that ended terribly. So the question is, when were you surprised by something good coming out of a seeming failure? Think of a time when you got exactly what you thought you wanted and were disappointed. Why do you think that happened? How does that experience appear to you now as you look back on it with a different perspective? So my whole life has been the marriage of happiness and sadness, the juxtaposition of joy and tragedy. I can't think of a time that I had one or the other. So, I lost Molly, and that's been devastating, but likely I wouldn't have Jack. And not that they're interchangeable, because they aren't. But I could have lost Molly and not had Jack. All of the steps that led into his birth. And then through having him, I had the experience in Utah and my picture on a building. And these amazing things happened to me that came from the utter depths of despair. So I put my whole life is Phoenix-like. Every good thing in my life comes out of something bad, or so it seems. So running, I know with running, being molested just made me so messed up, and I was asthmatic and I wanted to be popular. And I got this inappropriate crush on a school teacher, and he was the assistant track coach. And so I went out for track. All the wrong reasons to join a track team, right? Oh, I have a crush on the coach. And that was an incredibly unhealthy time for me. But I went to college for free, everybody. Talk about a great thing coming out of a decision that was made for all the wrong reasons. My addiction story that I'm still really nervous about sharing involves this guy, Doug, that I've talked about in prior episodes. And Doug is not his actual name, it's a pseudonym. But in the throes of that addiction, that sort of ended around 2019 or so. In the throes of it is when I found KK. And I remember Karen Kenny as KK. And I started with like one-on-one mentoring with her, and it was a huge chunk of money. We had received Molly B money, so I had it. I went and just got her cash. I'm in a dentist parking lot. I'd been up all night smoking the drug that I'll talk about in future episodes with Doug. And I was out of my mind. I was just like not okay. And I wanted to stop so much. And I was still in the throes of it and hadn't really taken the steps I needed to take to truly be done with it. I was getting there. We had just settled the lawsuit. It was like the summer of 2018. I was just a mess. But I started with her, and I wasn't even honest with her about it. She didn't know about my drug addiction until long after I started with her. But from that horrible, horrible 2.5 years of just devastating drug use, I found KK. And I found her because I would be so tired in the daytime that I was functionless. I would just sit on the lawn and scroll my cell phone, and she did these Facebook Lives. And I just decided, you know what, I need to do this. This will help me. So that's another example. And then Gracie after baby Gordy. So Kenny and I were never going to have children, never. And I decided, so I was on the pill, and we got pregnant with baby Gordy because I didn't realize antibiotics decimated the pill. So baby Gordy wasn't a bad thing. We decided, all right, we're having a baby, and then he died. And that was a bad thing, a devastating thing. But what that taught me was that I most certainly did want to be a mother. And Kenny and I embarked on the creation of Gracie with incredible focus and good health and all of the right things. Gracie was created in such an environment of love and purpose. It was beautiful. So those are my examples for that. All right. So this is all around admitting on powerlessness. And this is where I am. I'm step oneing it right now. I'm turning it over to my higher power. I talked on a Facebook Live recently about how hard it's been for me to get my daily spiritual practice going. I set it up and I try and then I don't. I talk about all the different ways I try to do it. And what I've done with it is I've just tried to constantly pray all day. Now it's such a habit, the starting to pray, that I do it. And when I forget, typically something happens. I was driving to a road race this morning. The long healing prayer came on. It's a song. It's a long healing prayer in the Baha'i faith, and it was a sung version. I'm like, okay, there's a message from the universe, right? Barbara, listen to the long healing prayer. So I'm just trying right now to give it over, that I need to let go and let God, so to speak. I need to admit I'm powerlessness. Nothing I do is going to change this. I have to fix it. It is God's greatest surprise and God's constant disguise, but you only know it to be true by going through it and coming out the other side. You cannot know it by going to church, reading scripture, or listening to someone else talk about it, even if you agree with them. This is true about anything. So now it says, reflect on a dark or difficult time in your past. How did you perceive God as present or absent at that time? How do you view that time now? Write about how the memory of that time and your current understanding of it might be helpful in future situations. I have never felt God to be absent in my life. Never once. I'm a firm believer that we have free will, that God can facilitate things, but he knows, or she knows, God knows, that the way you learn something is by experiencing it and figuring it out, which is why I always go back to the analogy of praying for patience. God doesn't just pour patience all over you. He'll give you ways to practice being patient. He'll make you be patient, and that's how you learn it, right? So oftentimes we think we're getting the opposite of what we've asked for. In my darkest moments, I've often asked God why, but I've never wanted the answer because I always blame myself. I always blame myself. This was justification for Amy early on in our friendship, long before she and Roy separated. I shared with her about my AA experience and how tremendous it was. We were talking once about Roy's first wife and how he went on and on about her being an alcoholic and how that sort of ruined his life, and he would never marry anyone with alcohol problems. And it was just, we talked about it a lot. And I remember sharing with her all of this letting go and giving it over and just saying, all right, I quit, I give up, and you're right. And I talked to her about how I had to create my own reality to survive in my house. And maybe a month or so later, we were having a disagreement. And she goes, well, I just think you're lying to me. And I'm like, lie? I don't lie. And she said, yes, you do. You admitted that you were a compulsive liar. And I said, no, I said, that's what AA helped me with. Like, it fixed it for me, that I was never a compulsive liar. I just, when I was afraid, would create versions of my life that I thought would protect me. So yeah, storytelling, lying, sure. But She held on to that. She holds on to that still. One of my last conversations with Roy about Amy was her, she told me today that you're the biggest liar she ever met. I'm like, well, why are you talking to Amy about me? But that's how that was. Have I ever felt God to be absent? No, but I'm a blamer, a self-blamer, which gives people like Amy fuel to say, well, you admit it. You admit it. So that's how a lot of people in my life have gotten away with treating me poorly. And it's why certain people get attracted to people like me. And it's often too why in a family of children, one certain child is often the one that's chosen to be abused, not because they did anything wrong, but because the abuser has a sense that they won't fight, that they'll put up with it, that they'll get away with it. I have never felt God to be absent in my life. Even when Molly died, I mostly blame myself and then plead with God for forgiveness. I notice this in my own life as well, but mostly when I'm falsely accused of things. I'll just cower, accept the accusation, and then plead for a forgiveness I don't even need. So what comes to mind here is Gene Connolly and Steve Mello. The fall that I was being set up and then forced to resign, one of the first things that happened to me after getting yelled at by Chris Rath was Gene called me into his office, and I should have asked for a union rep to be with me or an attorney. And I knew it at the time, but I didn't. I just didn't. Went into freeze mode. And he made up this big story that he wanted me to resign or take a season off, that he didn't want me to come back too fast if things were bad. And I didn't even fight for it. I didn't even fight for it. Then he said, Chris says you're having an affair with that man. So now Gene Connolly has told me that Chris Rath, so that was the superintendent at the time, has said to a principal and an athletic director something in my personal life that she knew from an email. And I just sit there paralyzed now because I feel horrible and guilty because there's accuracy in that accusation. What does that have to do with me being a coach? And a little voice knew at that moment what I should have done is said, no, I'm not resigning. I'm not resigning. Are you firing me? What have I done wrong as a coach? I should have stood up for myself, but that isn't what I do. I just stay perfectly still and hope that it gets fixed. And so I said, fine, I'll take the season off. And what I saw later was in big letters across it, resigned. I did not resign. I agree. I should have gotten it in writing as well, but I trusted him. I had done a lot for that man. And Steve Mello had preached family to me. They both did that. That came to mind for this, that I don't blame God. I don't feel like God is absent. I feel like God is saying, oh, Barbara, honey, you're doing it again. What do I have to do to show you what to do right? That's how I feel. I just own my failures completely. The other thing that comes to mind is the story I've told about the person on the roof that is the floodwaters are rising and he keeps asking God for help and people come by in a boat and then somebody in a canoe and then somebody in a helicopter. And he keeps saying, no, God's going to save me. And then he dies and goes to heaven. And God's like, I sent you a boat. I sent you a canoe. I sent you a helicopter. We don't always see what God is doing for us or whatever you believe. If you don't believe in God, what your planning is doing for you, what your scientific research is doing for you. We all do things to seek answers. Research is a really important one. I've always said knowledge is power. And so all of those things are a piece of how you become healthy and well. A lot of people in AA are angry at God. And I have anger. Lord knows I have anger, but not necessarily at God. The next part was on bottoming out. Until you bottom out and come to the limits of your own fuel supply, there is no reason for you to switch to a higher octane of fuel, for that is what is happening. Why would you change? If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. If you really don't think you're in a hole, you're not going to stop digging. You will not learn to actively draw upon a larger source until your usual sources are depleted and revealed as wanting. In fact, you will not even know there is a larger source until your own resources fail you. That's kind of where I'm at now. And I've been here many times before. I am praying a lot more now. I rejoined the nest. I'm reinstituting things in my life that I know will be helpful for me in this. But I don't make time for them. I don't make time for the follow through. So I'm no different at all. I haven't changed a bit. How much do you depend on your own strength and abilities to get through your everyday struggles? This is the question. How easy is it for you to ask others for help? No. When did you last ask God for help? Name at least one area where you feel like you might be reaching the limits of your own fuel supply. I'm reaching the limits right now in the ability to manage my house, in the ability to get everything done, to really grow my podcast so I'm not spending a ton of money instead of making money, in the ability to get the Molly B Foundation financially solvent, like all of these things. I just keep spinning my wheels and there's got to be reasons why. And I'm ready for someone to just give it over. Let me give it over and get help. So I completely rely on myself to get through the day. Kenny will say I don't ask for help. And I feel like I ask him for help all the time. But here's what I do. Kenny, just take Jack and go play and let me do this, which is really what I want. To me, that's how he would help me. He looks at that as me saying I don't need help, but he doesn't listen to the fact that I need him to get Jack out of my hair so I can get things done. So I just get frustrated, but I don't like to ask for help. I often also feel that people offer me help when they know I don't need it, so they can then say, you never need my help. I'm not always great at asking for help. I ask God for help every day, but I'm not sure I listen. I'm overwhelmed in my clutter-filled house, my podcast blog, and the Molly B Foundation. I feel like I'm making no progress. And that's true. Now we get back to ego. And I think all of us, doesn't matter if you have an addiction or not, all of us have ego, our ego selves, and our outside of ourselves, our loving selves. Ego is fear, love is love. Those are opposites, right? So when you live in fear, when you make a decision over fear, whether you're afraid of someone, afraid of change, afraid of yourself, that's your ego controlling you. Come on, Barbara, just keep going. You'll be fine. Come on, have another drink. Come on, sign up for something you don't really want to do. Spend the money, buy those shoes. That's your ego sort of keeping you in the chaos. And your loving self would allow you to sit back and let your feelings flow through and make a decision that is much more mindful and productive. An ego response is always an inadequate or even wrong response to the moment. It will not deepen or broaden life, love, or inner laughter. Our ego self is always attached to mere externals, since it has no inner substance itself. The ego defines itself by its attachments and revulsions. The soul does not attach, nor does it hate. It desires and loves and lets go. Please think about that. It can change your very notion of religion. So religion we think of as a list, 10 commandments on the classroom walls in Louisiana. That's what people think of religion. I talked a couple of episodes ago about the Book of Laws in the Baha'i faith, the Kitabi Akdas. There are volumes and volumes of books that Baha'i should read that are not the Kitabi Akdas, that talk less about rules to follow and more about behaviors to exhibit and love to share and kindness to spread, right? As opposed to make sure you do these 50 things or you're not getting into heaven. What area or areas of your life do you have a need to control? How hard do you work at maintaining that control? What is it costing you in terms of physical and emotional health? How does your need to control affect your relationships? The hardest part for me in terms of control is understanding that there are certain things I can't control, and I let that fester inside of me. I don't like a lot of what's happening to women and girls in our society right now. I can't control what's happening outside of me. I can't. All I can do is figure out what I can control in myself and how I can potentially contribute in a way that's healthy. But I obsess about these things. It was that way with Roy. I would lie here and just all the different ways. How can I fix this? How can I fix this? How can I fix this? And I would obsess on it to the point where I wasn't fixing anything else. And I know if you've listened to all of my podcast episodes, when I talk about the final nails in Molly's coffin, Roy is one of them. Doug is one of them. And it's me just trying to control something that I can't control and allowing it, to befuddle me and control me. So my need to control affects all of my relationships, all of them. It affects every relationship. I get angry, that affects Jack. That affects Kenny, that affects Gracie. I am better at relinquishing now than I was a few months ago. But I often feel like if I don't do everything, it won't get done. Talk about a control person, because I want it done a certain way. And then oftentimes just if I don't do it, it won't get done. But what I've done is I've created an environment where I double bind everybody so they don't do anything because it doesn't matter because it's going to be wrong and I'll be mad anyway. So I do have a tendency to want to control things. I am trying very hard, working on ways to relinquish control. And I think if I think about giving it over to God or my higher power, as opposed to giving things over to Kenny or Jack or Gracie, then I might have an easier time of it. I could try to control Molly and the Molly B Foundation, her memory, Molly's stuff and stuff in general, our house, our big messy house, and our calendar and our schedule. And money, I try to control the money and it's just piddling away. I find that my need for control is worse when I'm stressed or worried. That makes sense. Trying to hold on, don't fall off. I go back to my chaotic childhood years, ages 9 to 13. This is significant because so many of my memories of elementary school, Kimball School, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and then Runlet, 7th and 8th primarily. 9th as well. 9th was at Runlet for us. Those 6 years of my life were utter chaos. It was the abuse starting, then all the ramifications of the abuse and my house becoming more chaotic, then realizing if I don't do something, the abuse is going to absolutely heighten. So I tell, and then all the fallout of telling, And then my father moving back home and me having to figure out how to feel okay about that. And then finding running, right? Talk about having no control of my life. Running was the first thing that gave me a measure of control. After I told my mother, I was very active in gymnastics, but I wasn't any good at it. Once I found running, I had a huge piece of my life that made me feel powerful. It made me feel in control. I was successful. I liked my body. It was an unbelievable connection for me. And I think ultimately saved me because my addiction itself had my addictive personality had already taken hold. And then finally, what the ego hates more than anything else in the world is to change, even when the present situation is not working or is horrible. Yeah, so the status quo is better, even if it's yucky, because the fear of change is bigger than the fear of how bad things are right now. That is why so many people stay in abusive relationships. They figure out a way to handle and manage the bad so that because they're afraid that what if they go to something worse? Instead, we do more and more of what does not work, as many others have rightly said about addicts, and I would say of all of us. The reason we do anything more than one more time is because the last time did not really satisfy us deeply. Think about that for a minute. So that's two things. We do it again because we weren't satisfied. So I immediately go to smoking. You take a hit, you get high. You're high. You're so high, it's amazing. Then you have to do it again. And then you have to do it again. And the longer you use the substance, the more you need it because the intensity of the high alters and changes, right? So I take that same behavior and apply it to the ways I'm trying to fix my life. Well, if I just clean the house this time, if I just get up at this hour, if I just arrange my schedule this way, if I just sit down and write it out this time, I have like all these different calendars and journals and things that I think will organize me. I write 2 or 3 times and then they're empty. What is it? That's powerful for me. The definition of insanity. I won't get high this time. Well, I'll just have 1 drink. Well, I'll go to the bar, but I won't drink. All of those things. Here's the question. What is your first response to a change in your life? How do you find your way to acceptance? Write about a time when you knew that you needed to make a change, but resisted. Write about another time when you found something better. What are you afraid to change right now? How can you take 1 step forward? A time I needed to make a change was shortly before Molly died. I was walking out on my porch. I was working for Doug, and he had a very negative hold on my life. He was interfering with Roy, believe it or not, talking to Roy all the time. So Roy and Doug would fight about me. Meanwhile, I lived with Kenny and my girls, and it was insanity. It was utter insanity. I knew it was. And I was being manipulated a bit by Doug with drugs and alcohol, primarily alcohol then, but the promise of drugs. And then Roy would break up with me and come back to me and break up with me and come back to me. And I still don't know, because there's no talking to him, what all that meant. And then Kenny was just muddling along, just trying to make every day just be every day. And I remember walking on my porch and saying, Barbara, your world is going to blow up if you don't fix something. There are times now that I think if I had fixed something then, Molly might still be here, because I just think other things would have changed as well. This is where I blame myself, right? But that's a time that comes to mind for me where I should have made a change and I didn't. I am a classic hole digger. This is what I wrote. I stay the course. I keep trying the same thing over and over, hoping that this time it will work. My job situation. Every time Chris Rath and Gene Conley said jump, I jumped, not realizing that what I needed to do was say, stop it. I know what's happening. I have an attorney. Roy over the years. So it didn't take me long into my relationship with Roy to realize that he and I alone were fantastic, but I didn't like how he treated his children at all. I didn't like how he spoke of them. I didn't like how he spoke of parenting. And I didn't necessarily like how he was around Gracie and Molly. He bought them things. He said nice things about them. Anytime that we were together, he was nice to them, but he would just say things to me. Like I remember thinking I wouldn't want to subject them to him. I should have just stopped the relationship right there, but I was afraid. I needed him so utterly desperately. And I had lost my job by this time, which means he's the reason I lost my job. If I didn't stay with him, then what was the point? Really, really, really unhealthy thinking, fear-based thinking, ego-based thinking, panic thinking, setting schedules. What I need is somebody to come and set me a schedule. I just have to follow it. And why can't I set my own schedule? What am I afraid of in having a schedule? I fall back onto similar procrastination patterns. Training practices. I remember Bob 70 telling me he was the most dedicated athlete he knew. I never missed a practice. I went to every practice. I never missed. But here's the thing. I showed up hungover. I showed up not having eaten. When I left practice, it was like I wasn't a runner anymore. And I just went and drank and ate and did whatever. And I see that in myself now. I pay all this money for a good therapist, for a web designer, for a podcast editor, and I quickly do the podcast and then I forget about it until the next one's due, rather than look at the metrics and consult and talk. I'm just wasting my money because I'm not utilizing this amazing service I have. Same with my webpage, same with the Molly B Foundation, same with my blog, all of it. I just, same with Carolina in the therapy. I do my 90 minutes and I don't even think about it until my next appointment a week or two later. Same thing. This is all what I do. The 75 Hard last summer and the Get Better Girl, that was something that I committed to and followed through on. I didn't make it a lifetime choice. I made it definitely a 3-month thing, but I do realize that it set up for me a much better way to manage. Why am I obsessing right now and doing a whole conversation on Alcoholics Anonymous? In my years as a health educator, I talked about the 12 steps a lot and actually showed my students these and said, you should use these in your goal setting. We could modify certain things as we went through. I'll go through all the 12 steps with you. If you've never heard of them, go ahead and Google it. It's an interesting way to organize your life. But in terms of my addictive personality, so there was a study done with rats, cocaine in the water. They put a rat in a cage, put cocaine in the water. That rat kept going back to the cocaine. They said, yep, see, cocaine's addictive. And somebody else came to look at the experiment and he said, but you took the rat out of its natural environment. You need to have a whole colony of rats and give them options, the good water, the bad water, and now see what happens. Lo and behold, those rats did not get addicted to cocaine. It was there. The drug was the same. But they had each other and they had their routines and their schedules and their sense of belonging in their community. So they did not become addicted. When I was molested the first time, I was changed forever. I no longer fit in because I didn't know if anyone else had been molested. I now know that some of my closest friends had. We didn't talk about that. So I no longer fit in. Even though I was still in a group, even though I still had friends, something in me was now different. And I became very lonely and I felt very isolated. This is a precursor to many levels of addiction. My method of dealing with these things was to get completely busy. So I'd create this ridiculously busy schedule, which I would run from thing to thing, kind of like now. And that would keep me from thinking too much about what was going on. I remember the first beer I ever drank. It was with Anna Fine in my attic, sitting on a rolled up carpet. Years later, I found the empty beer bottles in the carpet, in the rolled up carpet. My neighbor was having a party and we tried the beer and I loved it. I loved it right away. I loved the little ringing in my ears it gave me. I loved the rush and the warmth. I loved it. And I was a big, heavy drinker in high school. I drank myself into oblivion more times than I can count. I threw up many times. I did stupid things. I blacked out. And I knew going off to college that partying would be a big part of my experience. I loved all the partying that happened at college. And I knew all along that I was never going to be the runner I could be if I continued to party. And yet I continued to party. That was my alcoholism. That was my addiction. I tried pot. I didn't like it. I've never been a pot smoker. I don't like how it makes me feel whatsoever. I didn't like Quaaludes and pills. I didn't like taking pills. I grew up sick. The drug that decimated me, actually got me sober, was cocaine, which I've talked about before. It was in the 80s and so many people did cocaine. And that's the drug that pulled me into a dark clutch after Molly died. So there, I've said it. And that is a story that will come as this podcast goes along. I have an addictive personality. A lot of really elite athletes do. It's how we train every day. I got addicted to running. I loved the dopamine. I am not in a good place right now. I haven't worked out for 2 weeks. I miss it. I miss the dopamine. I miss the CrossFit high or the runner's high. I miss the release that athletics gives me. It's a part of my addiction. Do I feel like I need to cure myself from that addiction and then suddenly I won't want to work out anymore? No, because there's a million healthy things I love about my running and my CrossFit and all of the physical things I do. But I do know that I need it to be a complementary part of my life and that I have tried every which way to Sunday to manage my life. And I've hit my bottom. I'm powerlessness. I'm powerless right now. I am powerless over myself. I have to give myself over to a higher power. I have to make the decision to give it up and let it go. When I get off of this recording, I'm going to go online because everything's online now and find an AA meeting to go to. And I think I'll start once a week. I think that will be a really good thing for me to do. Is it because I want to quit drinking? Well, probably. And I'm coming up on July 1st when I'm going to anyway. So why not pull some good recovery work into it? I find that that's, an incredibly helpful aspect in all aspects of my life. Abuse survivor, trauma survivor, drug addict, alcoholic, child lost mom, multi-injured person, an adult female human who's happy with herself just the way she is, me. That's it. So Next week, we'll get into the next steps, the next tradition. So unity, the traditions are more focused on the meetings themselves. So step 1, admitting you're powerless over alcohol. Just admitting, I got to give myself over to God or whatever it is for you. So that's where I am right now in every aspect of my life. I need to pull a spiritual realm back into it in a much more vigorous and diligent way. And unity, I need to create community for myself so that I don't feel alone, which will make the addictions harder to break. So that's that. So episode 148. I think this is season 9, quite honestly. So I think we'll call season 8 the year of living dangerously. And season 9 will be living in recovery. And I'll talk about all of these things. I would love to hear from any of you that listen to this, things that you feel that are addictive things in your life or issues that the 12 steps could help you with, because these things are always fun to chat about and talk about. And I actually was thinking that I might start little chat groups because I think it would be fun to share these experiences with others. That's episode 148. And I'm just going to try to share my horrifying addiction story after Molly died. There are some stories that will be very hard for me to tell. And how I am now, completely, while I have alcohol, I am completely drug-free since June of 2019. Completely. That's it. I haven't had anything except alcohol since then. Pain pills when prescribed for my many surgeries, but that's it. I'm done. It's over. And that's a really good way to feel, an incredibly good way to feel. So be good to yourself, however that looks. And don't let other people tell you how to be good to yourself. When you're done being good to yourself, be good to someone else. And as always, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.